All right, it is 8:02 and we're gonna kick things off. Welcome everyone to Bike Minds. Thanks for making time for our event on your Thursday evening or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. The theme of tonight's event is Bikes and Leadership, and we've got 4 really exciting stories to share with you tonight. I'll be your host for the evening. My name is Matt Pinder. I work as a transportation engineer by day, and in the evenings, I am the co-founder and host of Bike Minds. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Bike Minds in a second, but I first just want to share that and acknowledge that the land that I'm speaking from today is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Everybody here on the call is speaking from somewhere else. I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat, maybe share a little bit about where you're from as well. So as I said, tonight's event is Bikes and Leadership. We're going to have 4 stories. You'll have a chance to submit questions as those stories go in the chat. And then changing things up a bit, we're going to have a bit of a virtual mingle after that. You'll notice that today, if you've been keeping up with our series, we're using the regular Zoom platform. So you'll have a chance to turn on your video, to say hi, and even unmute yourself to ask a question. So it'll be a bit more conversational than we've had in the past. A reminder that we are recording this meeting, and we're also trying a new feature tonight called the transcribe function. I think, Robert, you need to turn it on, but there will be a transcription of all of the audio that's shared in real time. A little bit about Bike Minds. We've been going for 3 years strong now, started in Toronto at a small cafe and transitioned to virtual when the pandemic hit. And our mission is to change the way that you feel about people who ride bikes, one story at a time. And our vision is a world where everyone can see themselves riding a bike. So we're all about improving perceptions of cycling and making it more accessible to more people. As I said, we were started in 2018. We've since had 13, I think 14 events by now. We've had almost 100 stories shared across those events. And you'll find recordings of all those stories at our website, bikeminds.ca. A big thank you to the 4 storytellers who are going to share their bikes and leadership stories this evening. We're going to hear first from Jamie STUCKLESS, and then LANRICK Bennett Jr., followed by Christopher McGarrell, and then Hans MOOR. And everyone has a story. We'd love to hear your story. You're welcome to submit it at any time through our portal at bikeminds.ca. We welcome stories from all members of the cycling community, and we always aim to provide space for storytellers with a diversity of backgrounds and experiences. So if you have one you'd like to share, please submit it, and we'll reach out about a future event. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off and introduce our first storyteller for the evening. Jamie STUCKLESS is a policy advocate and transportation professional who is passionate about supporting people and making change in their communities. She's turned her love of cycling into a decade-long career in Ontario's active transportation sector, leading successful advocacy initiatives to fund hundreds of kilometers of cycling infrastructure, increase active transportation to school, and engage thousands of stakeholders in meaningful policy discussions. Through STUCKLESS Consulting Incorporated, she now works on transportation and sustainability projects across North America. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm joining this evening from Hamilton on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Anishinaabe Nation. And I'm very pleased to be with you here this evening with the Bike Minds virtual event. So as you can see from the first slide on my screen, my love of riding bicycles started early while I was growing up in Canada, which is a suburb of Ottawa. Over the years, cycling has been a main mode of transportation for me, but it has also taken me on quite the professional and personal journey. I'm so honored to be here this evening as part of the Bikes and Leadership storytelling session. I've given a lot of presentations about cycling over the last decade, but one thing I haven't really talked about is what's called my personal cycling story. So I've been more than a little bit stressed out over the last week, really trying to figure out what that is. And tonight, what I want to share with you is how cycling has played a central role in shaping my life, and how I hope that I am also helping to shape cycling in return. Going back to my childhood, we were pretty reliant on driving for most of our trips, but I was lucky to live close enough to school that I could usually walk or bike. This worked out really well for me because as a kid, what I really craved was independence and not needing to be driven around everywhere by an adult. With that being said, though, to be fair, my parents still did drive me to quite a lot of places. But when I could, I loved to walk, cycle, run, rollerblade, or take transit to get places. And I still remember the first transit trip I took on my own downtown. I got a beaver tail, I visited a museum, and I walked around, and I felt so free and so grown up. And I've continued to seek that kind of freedom in how I move around through other modes of travel, and especially through cycling. I didn't cycle much in high school because there was really nowhere safe to park my bike at school, and rollerblades were a lot easier to fit into my locker. I also had a friend that I regularly picked up along my route to school, and it was easier for us to chat while walking than while biking. After high school, I brought my bike to university, and it was stolen from our front porch, so I didn't cycle much there either. But near the end of my 4 years of studying geography at Queen's University, my friend and I were both headed to Ottawa to visit family for Easter, and we thought that it might be a fun idea to try cycling for the return trip. So we borrowed some bikes. I bought a bike rack so that we could transport our bikes one way by car. We downloaded a map from the internet and filled our backpacks with peanut butter and jam sandwiches. Now that I know what bike panniers are and just how useful they can be, I really can't believe that we also put all of our textbooks in our backpack and carried them with us. I guess maybe we thought we were going to study for exams along the way. There was definitely a lot that we didn't know about cycle touring when we were preparing for that trip. But in the end, it really didn't matter to us at all. We had an amazing time and created memories that I will carry with me forever. And it was really that trip that inspired me to want to find ways to make it safer and easier for more people to ride bikes and to experience the joy and freedom that I had felt while cycling. So with that well-timed trip, it really helped me to get on the path that I am on today. Wanting to learn more about cycling, I wrote my master's thesis on cycling behavior at McMaster University. And then I got a job helping to make it safer and easier for students to walk and bike to school as a school travel planning facilitator with Green Communities Canada in Ottawa. From there, I had the chance to coordinate Ottawa's Bike Month and support other sustainable transportation initiatives through EnviroCentre before I became the executive director of Ontario's Share the Road Cycling Coalition and moved back to Hamilton. After 8 years of working at Share the Road, I've now launched my own independent consulting practice where I get to work with amazing people and organizations across North America to help make our mobility network safer, healthier, and more accessible. In all of the roles that I've been fortunate to have, I've had the opportunity to participate in so many city and town council meetings across Ontario and ride bikes in communities of all sizes across North America, and usually with the benefit of a local host or guide, which really made me feel like I got the opportunity to get to know these places I was riding. I've also had the chance to attend hundreds of community-led bike rides and events, conduct research and author briefing notes that have helped shape transportation policy, advocate to fund hundreds of kilometers of bike lanes and trails. I've volunteered on election campaigns by bike, and I've worked to bring people together from across the cycling space, both virtually and at conferences. And in all of this work, I've been really fortunate to be supported by my awesome family who are joining this evening, including my parents and my husband, who have volunteered at all 6 of the Ontario Bike Summits that I organized as the executive director of Share the Road, and also supported by the incredible and growing network of people who are passionate about cycling in this province and who I feel lucky to call both my colleagues and my friends. As much as I feel like I've made a profession out of my love of cycling, it also continues to be deeply personal. So cycling has also been the lens through which I've learned about public policy, how governments work, and about the importance of community advocacy. So I thought that I would take this opportunity to share a few of the lessons that I've learned and I'm still learning along the way. First, cities and towns across Ontario face similar challenges and opportunities. They are often experienced at different times and at different scales, but sitting in on so many town and city council meetings, I heard so many of the same issues being discussed. Unfortunately, I feel like there's very little mandate for us to engage across municipal boundaries and to learn from each other. And often in community, we can be too quick to jump to the exceptionalism of only in our city, we just can't get this together, instead of looking to our neighbors and having conversations to share knowledge and experience. Secondly, I've found that it's so important and valuable to take the time and celebrate progress, which can sometimes be hard in cycling, let's be honest. Whether it's an investment from a municipality or a successful community-led effort, celebrating progress lets people know that their efforts are seen and that their efforts matter. It can be important for building relationships as well as for building morale in community members who are involved in the movement. I'm not saying that we have to celebrate everything, and celebrating doesn't mean that we still don't have a long way to go, because we do. But pausing to celebrate from time to time can have a really big impact. And lastly, because the theme of this evening's session is leadership, I feel like I've been able to learn a lot about leadership through cycling. I really appreciate the work that Bike Minds has been doing to center a lot of community leaders in the cycling conversation. We really need to look for and value leadership everywhere, and not just in organizations and in municipalities. Having had the opportunity to serve in a traditional organizational leadership position, I learned how lonely these leadership positions can be, with the weight of expectations and the unending series of decisions that need to be made. And I also learned how important listening is to leadership. No one leader can encompass the breadth and diversity of cycling, and they shouldn't have to. There are so many voices who are part of the conversation. And so, that's why I think it's so important that we value all kinds of leadership and welcome every voice into the cycling conversation, just like Bike Minds has been striving to do. So I feel like another lesson that I've been learning through the lens of cycling is about social justice and equity. As a cycling advocate, it can be really easy to feel like I don't have a voice and that no one's ever listening. But what I wasn't seeing is all of the ways that I do have a voice and was choosing not to use it. There have been many aspects of the last 2 years that have been eye-opening, but I wanted to share one in particular. In mid-2020, Hamilton almost lost our long-standing bike share system. Advocates like myself jumped into action, submitted delegations to council, encouraged people to write letters, and got over 9,000 people to sign our petition to save bike share. We weren't successful in securing city funds to keep bike share going, even though some private funds came forward, and it felt like just one more time that cycling voices were being ignored. But this tweet that I have on my screen from a local organizer I respect about showing up for bikes but not showing up for Black lives really prompted me to rethink my perspective on the ways that I was seeing and using my voice. I tell myself that I care about mobility justice and safe space for all people. And I'd shown up to some events and some protests, but if I was really honest, I was only speaking up when things were directly related to cycling, and I wasn't seeing all of the fundamental ways that these issues were connected. I'm really still figuring out how to use my voice, not just for cycling, where I feel knowledgeable and have lived experience, but also in support of these crucial community conversations about equity, racism, reconciliation, and justice, where I don't usually feel quite as comfortable. So while I'm really working to make sure that my life is about more than bikes, I don't think I could talk about my life without also talking about cycling. Cycling is always going to play a big role in my life, and I really hope that it's an activity that I can continue to engage in for the decades to come. I'm pretty excited to have recently hired the first employee at STUCKLESS Consulting Inc. with support from the Canada Summer Jobs Program, and they're going to be putting together some self-guided walking and biking tours of Hamilton to help people explore this interesting city by foot and by bike like I had the opportunity to do. And I'm so loving the opportunity to continue to combine my personal passions with my professional practice through cycling. As both myself and the cycling space continue to evolve, I hope that one thing will stay the same, that I will always continue to share bikes and share bike rides with the people that I love. And I hope that together we can continue to co-create communities where many people feel safe doing the same. Thanks again so much for the opportunity to be part of this session.
Thanks so much, Jamie. That was excellent. And I totally resonate with a lot of the things you said, but one in particular being the importance of having some positivity and kind of grounding ourselves in positivity in the cycling advocacy world. As someone who spends a fair bit of time on Twitter, I can say that it's important to have some good news and make good news sometimes every now and then. And that's one of the reasons we started Bike Minds, is because they're, people ride bikes because they like cycling. And of course, there's a lot of work to be done and a lot to complain about. But at the end of the day, there's some amazing things that happen on a bike. And that's why we're all here tonight. A reminder that people watching tonight can submit questions through the chat. I've got one that came through for you, Jamie. What is one thing that you think any community can do to promote cycling, as someone who's worked in communities giant and tiny?
Thanks for the question, Matt. And I'll just echo something from the chat, that I'm also hearing a bit of an echo or a ring when you're speaking. So I'm not sure where that's coming from.
Oh, okay.
No, that's a really great question. And it's so hard to narrow it down to just one thing. But I think what I usually say in response to that answer is, especially if you're just getting started or trying to figure out what to do, organize a bike ride. Get people out on bikes. And it doesn't have to be a bike ride where everybody rides. We've done rides where, we show a video of a route and meet people at a coffee shop, or have people walk along bike routes, because not everybody can ride a bike. But I think it's really valuable to, especially if we're talking about decision makers and city staff, to get them out in the community and riding bikes in the same places that people are riding bikes every day. Because sometimes, we'll often hear someone say, I don't feel comfortable riding my bike. And maybe the city's response is, oh, well, we're spending $2 million on cycling this year, so we're all set. And that $2 million may not be invested near the destination that people actually need to get to. So I would say, if you're looking for kind of one thing to get started that could open the door looking forward, organize a bike ride and get leaders and decision makers out on the bike ride to really get that conversation and center it in people's lived experience.
Thanks, Jamie. How's my audio now? Is it sounding a bit better?
There's a super quiet ring, but it's much quieter.
Okay. I'll introduce our next storyteller, and then I'm going to reset my Zoom in the background while that's going on. Thanks so much, Jamie. Great answer to the question, and we'll see you again at the end of the event. Our second storyteller for the evening is LANRICK Bennett Jr., who is the managing director at 880 Cities. He held previous positions as the hub manager at Artscape Witchwood Barns, regional advisor in the Ontario provincial government, and education officer at the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. LANRICK is a year-round urban cyclist who champions protected cycling infrastructure in multiple forms. Over to you, LANRICK.
Thank you so much, Matt. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you again. This is my first Bike Minds, and I wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement. Just going to see if this will work. There we go. This is a land acknowledgement that we use at 880 Cities, and I wanted to share it with all of you tonight. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, and an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwa and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. The land on which we reside on today is the site of broken treaties and covenants. It is our job as stewards to learn our position, both geographically and in terms of our personal identities. I am a settler. I am learning. And I'm coming from Toronto, just south of the Danforth, here in it's kind of the pocket, Leslieville, Riverside. It's the east side of the city. The name of I wanted this to be about my kids, but just kind of scoping everything together, I kind of flipped the coin and decided that I really wanted to talk about my daughter and the fact that my daughter no longer rides a bike, and that's okay. The picture that you're seeing is kind of a spaghetti of bike lanes that are throughout the city of Toronto. And if you see where it says East York there at the bottom right, that's kind of my area in Toronto, Danforth. I also want to make a shout out to my wife, Sabrina, who's been riding since 2016. She's a nurse manager at Princess Margaret Hospital and could seriously kick my butt in any type of cycling throughout the city. And I love her, and just great to watch her progress in her love for cycling. My kids, I've got two children, Jackson and Zoe. The pictures that you're seeing here were when Jack was 5 and Zoe was 8. This was during Open Streets, and this was Kristen Longtan's led Open Streets that stretched along the Danforth towards Bloor Street and down on Yonge Street. And looking at this picture here, when you look back at 2016 and you look now at 2021, where we're kind of fighting for active TO space, this Open Streets back in 2016 was a big deal, but we have yet to see this happen again in our city. I wasn't a big rider when I was younger. I had a bike, but really it was kind of, I lived in Mississauga at the time and we drove, basically everywhere. But watching my wife and watching how excited she was about riding, in 2018, in the spring, I decided to buy myself a bike. And my daughter was completely in love with the fact that I was on this bike, because we had actually purchased bikes for our kids, but I was the one that was usually home and I really wasn't riding around with them. So Zoe and I decided that she was going to ride to school. And so throughout the month of April and a bit of May in 2018, we basically practiced every single day. We would ride on the sidewalks a bit, but get her onto the street, really showcase what it was like to be able to ride your bike and to get from A to B. And she was really excited about the prospect of being able to ride her bike to school on her own. We are no more than about 10 minutes away from where Zoe would go to school. The unfortunate thing is that where we were in Toronto Danforth, it was all painted lines. Nothing protected. It was a bit of a nail biter for me the first few times riding with her, but she was determined to make it and to do it continuously. And I was so very proud of her determination. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. On the exact opposite route of going to her school, on May 17th, Douglas Crosby was struck by a vehicle making a right-hand turn at Jones and Dundas. This was, as I say, the exact opposite route of our ride to Zoe's school. It was hard for her to really understand just the weight of knowing that we had literally just missed crash, and it really shook her her new self of being able to ride on her own. I think almost, it was almost by accident that we became advocates. And I have to say, before this, because I was so new to cycling, yeah, I was the advocate for sure. But being with my daughter and seeing how much it mattered to her to be able to get to school on a bike, we really started to raise our voices. We started to make some noise. We started to push our political representatives to make some changes. Those changes never happened. And even with my daughter writing to our counselor and to our trustee, nothing really changed in 2018 after Douglas Crosby was killed. No one came out to say we are going to make things safer. And my Zoe, she quit riding. She went on strike and didn't want to ride anymore because it was too dangerous, not just for herself, but for me, for her mom, for her friends. And 2019 was a really lonely time for me riding, because I had lost my partner who loved to ride with me in 2018. But there was this kind of little silver lining, because I think Zoe kind of taking herself away from being on a bike, she was determined to make sure that her little brother wasn't going to be afraid to ride. And this picture of Jackson is during a pop-up on the Danforth, where they were able to create a complete street. Zoe turned into this little advocate wonder kid, signing up her brother to talk about and deliver flyers across the East End about this Danforth destination, this ability of transforming this vital avenue into a new protected cycling lane. She started collecting information on crashes and watching press conferences about what was going on in our local world to really figure out how she could be a helping hand. Creating different markers across the East End to really hone in on the fact that it wasn't safe on our streets, and that we really needed to make our political representatives understand how important this all was. So we started reaching out to politicians and stopping them on the street and creating these little videos to talk about why she wanted it to be safe in her part of the city. And she brought her brother along on the ride. She wanted to make sure that he understood how important and why it was so important for her to be able to speak out and to speak forcefully about why we wanted safe cycling in our city. So from counselor to CBC to just creating as much noise as possible, my little Zoe was really becoming just this advocate of power in the East End, and it was just remarkable to watch. This picture right here really kind of just pulls it all in. This was 5 years ago on the left. This is Jack during that same open streets that Kristen Wong-Tam had put forth. And the picture on the right with the 17 is Destination Danforth during its literally just a few weeks before it was officially open. I want to just say about being an advocate and wanting to just push the fact that you have to make it fun. You want to make sure that if your kids are involved, if they think it's important, just be there for them to make it as fun as possible. Again, you want to advocate with your kids. We are a family of 4. And all of us, with the exception of Zoe, rides a bike, but we are all determined to advocate for the safe travel across the East End. And I think Zoe would really appreciate this, that you never give up. As much as she is still on her bike strike, she's making noise in the best way possible. And I think people are listening, which is really cool. So I just want to give love to my little girl, who's no longer a little girl. She's 13 now, and I'm looking forward to the day that she feels that it's safe enough for her to be able to ride with me. And thank you, everyone, for listening to my story.
Wow, thanks, LANRICK. That was so inspiring. I think you called her an advocate wonder kid or something like that. I think that's a pretty good term. I got a question from the audience. Do you think that being an advocate will allow Zoe to feel more empowered in her future?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great question. She definitely was a shy kid when she was a bit younger. And I've got to say now, where she can see that her actions can actually bring some change, and even for the times where, and I'll be honest with you, she's written to our counselor here in this ward, she's written to the trustee, she's kind of gotten nowhere with them. So she made the determination to go outside of our ward, talk to the counselors on the east side, on the west side. She's made the commitment to change how our neighborhood, how our community is going to look at cycling. So yeah, it's she's not making, she doesn't need to make massive noise. She just wants to make sure that her actions and her determination are key to what has to be changed in our community, and I'm so proud of that.
Wow, yeah, I can only imagine. Way to go, Zoe. Well, thanks, LANRICK. We'll move on to our third storyteller, and we'll see you again at the end. Just a quick update on the logistics front. I mentioned at the start of tonight's event that we had live transcript. We've actually just turned that feature on. So if you go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can find a button that says live transcript. And if you click that, you'll see live subtitles that come up from when people are talking. So without further ado, our third storyteller for the evening is Christopher McGarrell. Originally from Scarborough, Christopher is the founder of Mandem Cycling Club in Toronto. Founded in the summer of 2020, the club is open to anyone who enjoys riding a bike, and it quickly grew to over 1,000 members. Over to you, Christopher.
Nice save, Matt. Nice save. Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, yes, my name is Christopher McGarrell. I am coming to you from Toronto, and I would like to acknowledge that I am a settler on this land. This was home to many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit and many other First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Nonetheless, I'm here with you today. I want to confess, PowerPoint is not my strong suit. I've never had to use it in my life. I'm usually the one that runs the reports and then hands it over to someone else to create the pie charts and the beautiful looking slides. So I hope you guys don't mind if you just settle with my face for the next few minutes as I share my bike story and how I kind of stumbled into this world of cycling. So unlike Jamie and LANRICK, who have had cycling act as a part of their lives, it was completely absent from mine. So I'm actually somewhat jealous that they've been able to ride for as long as they have, because I haven't been on a bike since, I don't know, maybe 19, 20 years old when I got my license. And I was under the impression that the car was the way. And then between then and 2015, when I went to Amsterdam, I never sat on a bike ever. However, that trip to Amsterdam did pique my curiosity about cycling a little bit. I went there for the weekend with some friends. We rented some bikes. As some of you may or may not know, cycling is the way in Amsterdam. There's very little cars. So we used bikes for the 5 days that we were there. We rode everywhere. We rode to museums, we rode to parks. And every single time that I got on that bike, I felt something. I felt, whether you want to call it a positive energy or some kind of force, but I felt something every single time that I put my butt on the bike over there in Amsterdam. However, the strange thing is that when I came back home to Toronto, I never even had a single thought to potentially, have that become part of my life here until the pandemic hit. So, in March 2020, I come home from a vacation from the Bahamas and I turn my phone off airplane mode, and the CEO of the company where I work is telling everybody to stay home, and there's mass hysteria going on. I was pretty scared initially when COVID came around, and I found myself just waking up, going to work, going to sleep on the couch, napping after work, waking up, drowning myself in Twitter, looking at the different things that were happening across the world, the racial tensions in the States, and so on and so forth. And I was pretty down. I was actually, I'm not going to, self-diagnose myself, but if you were to ask me, I would tell you that in March and April of last year, I was depressed. I was gaining weight. I wasn't talking to my friends. I was just stuck in this maze. And it wasn't until maybe end of May where I started to talk to some of my friends, and the typical things that we would do to blow off some steam, like play basketball, go to the gym, weren't available to us. And I randomly texted one of my friends and I said, hey, you had a bike back in the day. Would you ever consider getting a bike again? And he said, yes. So from there, he and I made that pledge to each other, went on our bike hunts, and literally 2 weeks later on a Saturday, June 6th to be exact, he and I both bought our bikes at different locations. And I put a post on my personal Instagram just sharing with people how I was feeling, that I was feeling down and that I made this crazy decision to purchase a bike. And I'm hoping that this is going to be the thing that kind of gets me out of this slump. And the comments were filled from, friends from different walks of life, whether former coworkers, classmates, etc. And they were telling me that, they had bikes too. So I'm from Toronto, specifically Scarborough, a very large Caribbean and Jamaican influence over my slang and how I speak. The term mandem, for those that don't know, is pretty much like saying the guys, the fellas, your friends. So when I see the comments fill up with all these different people that telling me that they have bikes, and I had no idea that many of them were out there, I just said to myself, I have a bike. My friend Mark, who made the pledge with me, he has a bike. So-and-so has a bike, so-and-so has a bike. Haha, it's the Mandem Cycling Club. As a joke, I said it in jest. There's no business plan behind it. It was just something just kind of just spit out. And I was sitting down playing video games at the time. And my girlfriend said to me, you should do that. That's a good idea. And I said, Mandem Cycling Club, that's stupid. That is so dumb. Why on earth would I do that? Video games. About 10 minutes later, she came back off the balcony and she looked me dead in my face and she said, you always have these good ideas and you never put them to use. You have nothing to lose. Open up an Instagram for your Mandem Cycling Club right now. What do you have to lose? And I'm a stubborn Capricorn. So if you dare me to do something or challenge me to do something, even if I don't know if I can do it or I believe I can't do it, I'm still going to do it just so I don't look like a punk. And that's where the journey began. I opened up the Instagram, shared a couple bike pics, shared a video from my bike trip in Amsterdam. And then next thing you know, my friends were asking me, when is this first ride? When is the first Mandem Cycling Club ride? And I didn't know anything about being a bike club leader. I didn't know anything about organizing bike rides or where to ride for that matter. But I'm a Scarborough kid. I know Morningside Park is there. I know there's different nooks and crannies in Scarborough where we like to ride. So I put a ride flyer out for the following week, June 13th, 2020. And 7 of my boys that I've known 20 plus years showed up, and one stranger. One person that I've never met in my life, who was a friend of a childhood friend, came by himself, met me at Morningside Park at 9 a.m. And we went on our first ride. We did about 35 kilometers and it sucked the life out of us. We were out for about 6 hours. It was death. But when we got back, we had a great time. And next thing you know, I'm getting comments after I posted pictures from that ride. People are saying, what is this? When is the next one? Week 2 comes, I have 15 people, 4 of which are women. So even though the name of the club was Mandem, and it might have implied that it was a guy's thing, 4 women showed up from the second week, and I had a ride of 15 people. The third week, I had 35. And that's when I got scared. That's when I was so intimidated by what was happening, and I tried to shut it down. You know, like after that ride of 35 people, and mind you, we are in a pandemic, right? So we technically shouldn't even be gathering that many people, but the rules back then were a little bit gray. So I was kind of playing around with that. And I was so scared after I had 35 people come out, because I didn't start it to do something of that magnitude. I honestly just wanted to ride with my friends. But little did I know that there was a lot of other people that wanted to ride with their friends too. And the network just grew and grew and grew and grew. And I went from a guy that hasn't been on a bike at all in his adult life to hosting 18 consecutive cycling events over a 16-week period in the summer, making dozens and dozens of friends. I was on CP24 with Kayla Williams. I was on the cover of the Scarborough Mirror, the paper that I would get as a kid all the time. But most importantly, I made so many amazing connections with the people in my city and in our community. I made dozens and dozens of friends, and which is pretty difficult to do, you know, as an adult, to make new friends. I made dozens, and I'm proud to say that we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary a couple weeks ago, and I never thought I would be here, you know, and I never would have imagined that, you know, making that investment just for my own personal fitness and the well-being of, like, you know, my day-to-day life would have such a positive impact, not only on my community, but my friends. And I always say this, that typically when someone makes a vast or sudden 180 change in their life, that you typically leave your friends behind. But I've been so blessed that all of my close friends have bought into this bike life. They bought into it. They've all purchased bikes. You know, we went from guys that could barely do 10, 15 kilometers to riding to Niagara Falls from Toronto last year, which is 150K. You know, last weekend we were all out together. We all did, I think it was 80 minimum across the board. And we couldn't have even imagined that as a possibility when we got the bikes last year. So I just spread that word to other people now who are new cyclists, and, you know, the thought of maybe riding for 10 or 15 kilometers might seem daunting. And I just encourage them, and I share with them to let them know that I was just like you last year, and I just kept on riding, and my body adapted to the point where, you know, even though I'm a little bit fluffier than I was last year, I'm a way better cyclist, and I ride with so much more confidence, and it's put me in a position where I can share that, you know, that bike gospel with so many other people. So to be here now as, you know, the leader of a cycling club, or even a leader of my community, and furthermore, even acting more in an advocacy role, as I'm on the board of directors now with Cycle Toronto, hoping to make some changes in the city. The bike has been nothing but a blessing, and I'm upset that I never considered riding in my 20s. But I have nephews and I have other people that have kids that age that I can kind of share that word to. And I'm seeing it happen, where people that I would have never even imagined buy a bicycle, messaging me and saying, what do you think about this one? Or should I get this kind or this kind? And it's been a pleasure to watch. So I thank you guys for having me. Next time I pop up, I'll have a PowerPoint to show you some pics. But by all means, please, you can go to my Instagram of the club. It's @MandemCC. And the story's all there. You can see the very first post from when I shared my bike, and you can just watch how the community has grown over the last year and a couple of weeks. For those in Toronto, we do gather for rides in the city. Everyone's welcome, any skill level, any age, skinny or fluffy, come outside. And I would love to have you out there with us. So thank you very much, Bike Minds, for having me.
Oh, thanks so much, Christopher. You're gonna have to check out the chat after you turn your camera off. There's been a lot of awesome comments in there. Quite a few about fluffy riders uniting.
Yes, fluffy riders unite. Absolutely.
I'm gonna share one from Fareed, who says, I remember seeing the CBC story on it. My whole family thought it looked like a blast. Everyone was so happy.
Yeah, so that CBC
positivity.
story was actually during what would have been Caravana weekend here in Toronto. So I was gonna take that long weekend off, and everyone was like, no, we have to have a culture ride. And then I was like, all right, everybody bring your flag, meet me at Woodbine, and we're gonna ride to the X. And we had over 100 people come out. Some people had the carnival headdresses on. The Bluetooth speakers were playing soca music. Dwight Drummond from CBC rode with us. It was a great day. So yeah, thanks for that memory, because that CBC day was actually probably one of my favorite days. from last year for sure.
Wow, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
A question from Gerry. What's the, you're kind of, sounds like you've reached an operational state for Mandem. What's the post-pandemic future?
Post-pandemic future, well, if I look at what happened last year and I look at the, the fiber of what Mandem was, it was community building. It was doing what we can to get kids on bikes or get kids on bikes safely, supporting local businesses. So I'm looking at, or organizing it once things get back to our new normal, organizing events that can put all that into play. So whether it's bike swaps, whether it's, organizing rides and we're going to a specific restaurant or a specific local business to show them some love and support. Those are the things that resonate true to us. And then obviously just more rides. Like we socialize as much as we ride, to be honest with you. So it's really for everyone, whether you can ride 5K or if you can ride 50. It's really just been a blessing to bring everybody together and eliminate a lot of those barriers that typically exist when trying to, join or include yourself in some type of group or organized cycling, right? So it's been a blessing for me to be in this position, and I'm just gonna enjoy the ride and keep on riding.
Nice. Well, thanks so much, Christopher.
Oh, thank you.
We'll head on over to our final storyteller, and we'll see you again at the end. Our fourth storyteller for the evening is Hans Moor, also known as Hans on the Bike. He lives in the National Capital Region of Canada. And from 2010 to 2015, Hans on the Bike was president of Bike Ottawa, Ottawa's not-for-profit, volunteer-based safe cycling advocacy group. Hans has maintained a blog about cycling since 2010 with over 300 posts and works seasonally in Ottawa as a bicycle tour guide. Hans's work has earned him the City Builder Award from the Mayor of Ottawa and several other awards. Ottawa's mayor once tweeted that Hans is more popular than I am. Over to you, Hans.
Well, thank you, Matt. I am presenting from Ottawa, as people heard already, and that's the traditional land of the Algonquin Nation. Matt asked me to talk about the implementation of the Laurier bike lane, which was the first bike lane in Ottawa, and that goes back to 2010. So we'll kind of go a whole decade back in history here. But first I want to explain a little bit how Ottawa looks like. Ottawa is a bit of a weird city because you have to imagine there's the Ottawa River roughly going east-west. North of the Ottawa River is the province of Quebec with the city of Gatineau. And south of the Ottawa River is Ottawa. So there's the downtown core close to the river. There's the Byward Market, which is going back to the, I would think, 1840s, 1850s. Ottawa is not a very old city compared with some of the cities in Europe, obviously. And then we have all these suburbs that were post-war built, soldiers coming back, population, lots of immigration. So 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. And then we have a big green belt that's managed by yet another organization called the National Capital Commission. Outside that green belt, we have kind of satellite suburbs, 3 or 4, each with 50 to 100,000 people, I believe. And outside of that, there's a lot of rural land. So 90% of Ottawa is actually rural. So you can actually cycle in the countryside being in Ottawa. And if you come from Montreal or from Toronto, you'll see a sign, welcome in Ottawa, 1 million people. And you go like, where is Ottawa? Because I only see cows on my left hand and corn on the right hand. So it's a bit of an odd city to develop. So mostly when we talk about cycling, it's actually inside that green belt, which is roughly 25 by 15 kilometers. The entire city of Ottawa is the size of the country of Luxembourg, to give you a bit of an idea how big it is. So obviously cycling advocacy is very difficult in Ottawa because there's very different topographies. So I mentioned the NCC already, the National Capital Commission. It's working on arm's length from the federal government. So that's a completely different organization. It also operates in Quebec and it looks after a lot of the land along the rivers, the canals, the Gatineau River, the Rideau River, the Ottawa River, the Rideau Canal, and the National Historic Site. And already in the 1970s, they put, during the oil crisis, they put a whole bunch of pathways along those waterways so people could cycle and walk. Interesting fact is that the cyclovia, or the cyclovia that people talk about in Bogota, was actually already happening in Ottawa about a few years earlier. because they closed a number of the parkways that the National Capital Commission runs as well. So that was very advanced for that time. But after that, it kind of stopped a little bit. There was no development after those open annual open days. Now, what I started to notice, I came to Canada, I should tell you that, in 1998. So that's 23 years ago. You can imagine how old I am. I'm approaching 60 actually. When I came to Canada, I brought my bike with me because in the Netherlands, as you heard from Christopher already, cycling is a very common thing. We don't have this, I never experienced the activist type person. It's just there. It has grown a lot. When I was a kid, I mostly cycled on the roads as well, but there were pathways here and there. So my road to high school, for example, in the 80s, and I guess the 80s, was mostly on the roads, residential roads, here and there a pathway, but also some very busy roads sharing with trucks. So it's not always what you see in the videos on YouTube now. It wasn't when I was a kid. So in Holland, we've built it over the last 40 years. So I noticed that people were cycling in Ottawa, but most of them were kind of on the drop bar bicycles, racing from A to B. And my wife and I would often joke that, oh, there goes a cyclist. I bet he has a gray beard. And we looked in, yes, he had a gray beard. So that was kind of the joke we always had. Long story short, I ended up in bicycle advocacy kind of accidentally. I went to a meeting in 2009 that was organized by an MP, Paul Door. Unfortunately, he passed away. I was there and I was introduced as Hans from the Dutch embassy, and I got this applause, and I'm thinking, why do I get an applause? I'm just sitting here in my white t-shirt and shorts. I don't know anything about cycling. But people kind of appreciate the idea that I was from the Netherlands and therefore knows everything about cycling. Nothing is further from the truth. I can't even repair a bike. So, but somebody approached me and said, hey, would you like to join the Bike Ottawa? I said, I have to think about it, drink a coffee. Yes, let's do that. He says, would you like to become the vice president of Bike Ottawa? I said, well, I don't know anything about cycling. I don't know your members, nothing. But they said, okay, give it a try. I was in my mid-40s at that time, and let's do something different. Let's give something back to the community. Then half a year later, being the vice president, the president started to work for the city of Ottawa. And all of a sudden, I was the president of a bike organization in the nation's capital, and I had absolutely no clue. So I thought, okay, where do I start? And I noticed that there was a bit of a rift in Bike Ottawa at that time. It was partly because there were some people very vocal about cycling on the road. They were against bike lanes on roads, not so much pathways, but bike lanes on roads, because they like to cycle with the traffic. And their philosophy is that you cycle with traffic and you respect each other and everybody knows the rules of the road. It is a theory that could work, but the reality is that a lot of people say, I'm not going to send my 8-year-old on this busy road. So you had a bit of this discussion there, and the press picks up on that and kind of magnifies all those stories. You probably all went through that stuff, magnifies the stories, and it's like cyclists can't agree. It's great for headlines, of course. So I think one of the things that I was going to do is try to kind of get the discussion down about bike helmets, about cycling on the road, and really focus more on safety. Another thing that I learned was that a lot of people were sitting on the fence. They wanted to cycle more if the cycling was more safe in Ottawa. So I knew there was a very large majority, a quiet majority, that actually wanted to see safer roads, but just didn't get involved in actually advocating for that. Another thing I noticed was our board consisted of 9 middle-aged men and 1 woman. And I thought that's not right, because guys tend to be a little bit more into the A-types sometimes. And I felt like women are much more into safety and calmer cycling. So I wanted to make that gender split much more 50-50. And eventually I actually ended up with more women on the board than guys. So that was a really good thing. I also wanted to make sure that we improved our image and appealed to a greater audience. And what you often see is that cyclists dress like cyclists, they talk like cyclists, they look a little sweaty, they have a cap on or their helmet, they're angry. And I figured, no, you want to dress and behave like the people you want to convince. So you want to kind of convince that suburban person that's kind of going to work and sees the old cyclist, but doesn't really relate to that cyclist because he or she doesn't recognize himself or herself in that picture. So we made sure that every time we were interviewed, we were dressed well. I was actually wearing a suit in most of my interviews, even though I was sitting in a t-shirt behind my desk. I would say, I need half an hour, and I would quickly put my suit on. I also made sure that we reached out to other organizations, lots of volunteer organizations, from Ecology Ottawa to other transportation type and organizations. I wanted to make sure I knew everybody so we could connect and share the work. I also eventually wanted to change the name. You don't do that the first day you get on the board, of course, but our name was Citizens for Safe Cycling. And basically, no city, no press person could remember that name. It was always a fumbling of that name, Citizens for Safe. Kind of, if you have artificial teeth, they actually pop out. So I wanted to change the name in Bike Ottawa so it kind of reflects where we're from and what we're doing, Bike Ottawa. So that happened over time as well. Also, our logo was a green background with a white bike saying Citizens for Safe Cycling. I really wanted that logo to represent the city of Ottawa. So we had the Peace Tower, we created the tulips, which kind of referred to me, and a bicycle, of course. So it kind of became more of an identity for us to have that logo with something that was very typical for Ottawa. I mentioned already teaming up with other groups. We had some setbacks at Bike Ottawa. We lost all our funding, so that was all before my time. We had to move out of the office we had, so there was a lot of scrambling and stuff happening. So it was a bit focused inwards rather than outwards. But over time we changed that. So meanwhile, in 2010, the city wanted to put a bike lane into the downtown core, that business core. And there was a lot of resistance because it was something new, and there was a lot of ideas that that's a European thing. We can't do that here. We all drive cars. It's wintertime. We have 2 meters of snow. Nobody cycles in Ottawa. So there was a lot of reasons why not to do it, but there's also many reasons to actually do that. So I figured I cannot do that alone. I need a lot of other people to help Bike Ottawa. Even if I say I or me, I mean the whole board and the volunteers around it, of course. So I connected with a group who kind of somewhat separated for Bike Ottawa, but they had an enormous list of emails. I think something close to 2,000 emails from people who were in favor of that Laurier bike lane, whereas Bike Ottawa initially wasn't. So I reached out to them, introduced myself. We talked about everything. And also a blogger called Eric Darwin. He was very good in how the city works and understood that much better because he was years ahead of me so I learned a lot from him actually. So it's not like I knew everything. As I said before, I didn't know much. So I needed the knowledge from other people. So basically we met in the Chateau Laurier, then the Fairmont Hotel. I thought I just want to have something stylish and nice. And we met in the lobby a number of times to kind of strategize what we were going to do. And we figured one of the most important things is actually going to talk to the city councillors, because city councillors have a lot of stuff on their desk. I know quite a number of them personally, and a lot of it is about the grass is too high, the tree is too close to the corner, the snow is too high, there's too much salt in the road, there's not too much salt, there's too little salt on the road. There's a lot of this daily stuff that they're very busy with. Then, of course, you have the decision making in the city. So your problem is like this small. So if you don't magnify it, that's why developers put a lot of money in lobbying city councillors. If you don't magnify your own story, you don't get anywhere. So we did that. We collected a lot of data from Europe. We collected data about health. We collected data about the environment, although most people don't cycle to save the environment. Most people cycle for other reasons. We collected data about health. Everything we could find. We made graphs, we collected data, we compared it, we collected data from the own city reports to make sure we had a strong case. And then a number of our volunteers and board members and volunteers went to talk to all the city councillors to explain why we thought it was necessary. But you never know in a city council how people all of a sudden at the last moment might switch to another thing because they heard something they hadn't thought of. So you never really know, even though we listened very carefully to other city councillors, we talked with city staff to understand where the issues were so we could anticipate on it, but you never really know where these things are going. But anyway, we were prepared. We also made sure that the press knew that we existed. We trained the press a little bit. One of the things that the press often says is cyclist was hit because he didn't wear a helmet. No, it's not because of that. It's because the truck hit him. It's not because he wore a helmet. So we were actually successful in getting that out of all the stories. So you don't see that in Ottawa anymore, fortunately. On the day itself, I'm kind of compressing obviously a whole year in 20 minutes here. On the day itself, the vote in Transportation Committee. That's a subcommittee from the entire City Council of 23 people and the mayor. So the Transportation Committee has about 10 people or so, I think. No, actually, yeah, 10 people. There were 70 speakers. So in Ottawa or in Canada, we can talk for 5 minutes at the Transportation Committee, not at City Council, but the Transportation Committee. You talk for 5 minutes and you make your case. You can use PowerPoints. Christopher, you better get ready. You can use a video. You can do just talk like I do today. You can make your case in English and French. It doesn't matter. So we made sure that we're not all going to say the same thing. So somebody talked about safety. Somebody talked about health. Somebody talked about connections. Somebody talked about kids. Somebody talked about parking. Eric Darwin, the blogger that I mentioned, he went out and actually counted the parking spots at the high rises along Laurier to see if they were actually full, because a lot of those people were saying, oh, we're going to lose all our parking. But most of the parking was reconfigured. It wasn't that they were losing much, maybe 10 spots or so over a kilometer, and I think 1.4 kilometer one way, and obviously on the other side as well. So a lot of people were bitching and complaining on emotional grounds, but not on rational grounds. And we kind of try to do it rationally, even though you don't always win the argument on ratio, you sometimes lose it, but we try. So he would go in and counted that a lot of those parking spots in the parking were actually empty and not being rented or sold. Meanwhile, the owners, or a small group, not everybody, a small group of owners was actually rallying against the bike lane because they could never park their car anymore, or the caregivers couldn't park the car. And we had already mentioned that maybe you could sacrifice some of those empty spots in your parking garage. Oh, the building management didn't want to do that. There was actually a gentleman, he spoke for 5 minutes, and he mentioned that he was actually in tears. He didn't think he was ever going to see his son anymore because his son would not be able to park his car. Some of you are probably laughing now, but that's what you deal with in meetings like that. So of course you cannot burst out in laughter, but it's somebody's very strong feeling about that. So I'm kind of reading my text here a little bit. Yeah, one of the unions actually mentioned they were against the bike lane because some people are in a wheelchair and they wouldn't be able to cross the road anymore. But there's still crosswalks on the corners, and you're not really supposed to jaywalk on the roads anyway, even though everybody does that, of course. If you're here, the coffee shop is at the other side of the road, you're not going to walk 50 meters one way and back on the other side. There's curbs. The Laurier bike lane was initially a pilot of 2 years with those concrete curbs and then those flexi posts on top. But there's so many gaps in those concrete curbs that I think half I'm exaggerating a bit, but half the bike lane doesn't even exist with a curb, but just open spots. So you could easily, it was very permeable basically. So again, emotional reasons. We kind of go like, that's not really a reason, but you never know what people think in City Transportation Committee. To give you another idea, that whole meeting this was extremely long. That meeting, I think, started at 10, maybe our item was at 11, and it lasted until 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So the Transportation Committee took a break, and they were served pizza. And I walked up to one of the councillors that I hadn't talked to, and I said, "Oh, hi, councillor, so-and-so. My name is Hans, not on the bike yet at that time. I'm Hans. I'm the president of Bike Ottawa, and I just want to say hi and hope you find it an interesting day." She says, "Hans, you know what I don't understand? Why are cyclists always so what did she say? Why do they always have these different opinions?" And I said, well, there's actually a large majority sitting on the fence just waiting for safer cycling infrastructure. And there's a group of people who are just very upset that they're going to get bike lanes. But that's a loud group, but that's not the majority. I know that from experience by now. Wouldn't you know, when the vote came, she basically exactly repeated the words that I told to her. And of course, I didn't do that with the hope that she would repeat that because I had no idea she was going to say that. But she just basically took my word. So even advocacy at the last second did probably help, just maybe getting this person over the line to vote in favor. So basically the way it works is Transportation Committee says yes or no, and then it goes to City Council a week later, and then City Council says yes or no. So to compress that a little bit, The city council, I think 2/3 was in favor and 1/3 was against it. I don't remember who it was anymore. It doesn't really matter. A lot of councillors have gone by now anyway. But so the Laurier bike lane was built. And the nice thing was that, let me see here, that afterwards the city staff told us that they had never seen such a well-organized citizen initiative to get something through council. So I was obviously very proud. It's not something that I went for, just like I want to be the best organized event ever. But it was really nice to hear from city staff who see this all the time that they actually noticed it was an organized attempt to get something through council. So that I was proud of that. So in the end, the press was kind of part of sitting on the fence. One of the tabloids was saying, this is going to be ridiculous because we have 60 bicycles a day here. Why do we need a bike lane? Luckily, as soon as the bike lane opened, the next day, the number of cyclists tripled, more than tripled. And we know that from other places in Toronto, Montreal, the Netherlands, you name it, Portland, Oregon, wherever. You put bike lanes in and people come, like they always say, build and they will come. We saw it happening right in Ottawa downtown the next day. So that was really cool. Another thing I want to mention is that I was at a birthday party somewhere in 2011, and one of my friends, or some of the people I meet on those parties once in a while, very avid cyclist does the 100 kilometers a day type thing. And he said, that Laurier bike lane, that's going to be a black eye for the cycling community. And I never discuss that stuff because you cannot win. You can't win. So why waste your energy? So I just basically said, oh yeah, I had another beer. And 6-7 years later, he comes. Well, we see each other every year, but 6-7 years later, he comes back and says, we love what you're doing. We're so grateful what you're doing. This is great. Keep going, keep going. And I'm thinking, I didn't even have to convince him. We just, the developments convinced him, obviously, that it was the right thing to do. Coincidentally, they all have kids now, of course, and they realize, do I really want to send my 5-year-old daughter on Bronson Avenue, which is one of those busy arterials? So Matt asked me to talk about leadership a bit. I don't really see myself a leader. I mean, I don't look like a leader. I have white shirt, bald head, big ears, crooked teeth. I'm not that type of leader that people think I guess I am. I'm just a regular guy who just happened to be in the right spot at the right place, I guess. But there's a few things. I learned that you have to work really, really hard to get something done. There's a lot of people around you who help you, but if you really want to get something done, you probably, it's the 20-80 rule. You fall back on 20% of the people probably who do a lot of work. It basically became a part-time job, and because I was working for the embassy, I had a little bit of ins and outs here. I mean, just let's face it, if you say you're from the embassy, you wear a suit and tie, doors just open a little easier than when you show up with a sweaty green shirt, Bike Ottawa, and a helmet that has some scratches on. So that helped a little bit, but mostly I tried to kind of separate that a bit, but sometimes I kind of used it to my advantage. Let me see. I also found it very important to build the network, to sit face to face. This was a little bit before social media really took off. But I did get some really nasty comments once in a while that I was an idiot and stuff like that. But you kind of ignore that because that's people who sit in a basement typing away somewhere. And I'm thinking, okay, say that in my face. And most of them wouldn't dare doing that. So talking to people face to face, you understand them a little bit better where they come from. I think that's a very important thing. And the one thing most of you probably know as well, but I still see it happening on social media. Don't try to convert the haters. Haters are haters. They will never, ever admit that you were right. So you can spend the whole evening going back and forth. Basically, it's creating negativity for cycling in general. Just ignore all those people, do your own thing, talk to the right people, talk to city staff, talk to the city councillors, talk, in our case, the National Capital Commission. I have a lot of friends within City Hall as well, within NCC. A lot of people know me as well. And that's much more, a much better use of time than trying to convince some angry kid in a basement in a suburb somewhere. That's a total waste of time. So stay away from that. I'm sure I'm way over my 10 minutes by now, so I'm gonna leave it like here, and I'm just gonna say thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Hans, for sharing your story. I think we've got a few Ottawa people in the audience tonight. But for the non-Ottawans, it was great to hear. And I remember the first time I heard the story from you, just the level of effort and coordination that went into those bike lanes that has really paved the way for so much more across Ottawa. So thanks for sharing that. At this point, I would like to invite anyone and everyone who is here to turn on your camera, because I think we'd like to give a big round of applause to our 4 storytellers and show some appreciation for these awesome bikes and leadership stories. So everyone, cameras on, hands clapping. Let's make it feel like we're all in person. Awesome. And I hope some people here took a moment to kind of think of a question or two over the course of the event, and maybe we can have some people come forward with some questions at this point. I don't know if we have the hand raise function on right now, but if you've got one top of mind, turn off your mute and come on forward. Maybe introduce yourself too.
So,
and I'll jump in.
Yeah.
This is Neil Saravan-Mutu. I'm from Ottawa. Hans, great first of all, 4 of you, great presentations. Really enjoyed those. Really inspirational. Wish we could repeat every single thing that you've all said today. I have a question for Hans. I did put it in the chat, but just wanted to hear a bit more about your experience with reaching out to the people that are sitting on the fence. Those that, if the infrastructure was there, they would use it and they'd be appreciative. But how do you, are those people actually ready to do anything before it's there?
Well, I guess you have to ask them, but from the data, the city of Ottawa knows that there's a large group of people who would like to cycle more. They have to express that in some kind of a poll that the city did. And I'm always kind of visualizing who are those people. They're probably not the young and energetic types who just want to go for a ride, but people who want to go on a Sunday bike ride. And while talking, I actually remember now that people a few blocks away, I know them for a long time. They're about my age, late 50s or early 60s. And they always said, no, we're walkers. And this year, for the first time, she was walking the dogs, and she told me that, we are brushing up our bikes. We're going to cycle again. I said, well, that's fantastic. So I guess they somehow get the message eventually that there is a fairly safe cycling infrastructure that is doable. And what I've done over the last winter, because everybody has been inside a lot, and being retired, I spent even more time inside. I actually created a map. Neil, you've probably seen it, that map that looks like a subway map. And that has been so incredibly popular. You can see it on my blog if you go to hansonthebike.com. I made this map, and it shows all the connected multi-use pathways. And it has woken a lot of people up that there's more than just cycling along the canal and the river. And I think just putting stuff out like this is the existing infrastructure. This is where you are safe. Here is a fantastic 12-kilometer route, because not everybody cycles 30, 40, 50 kilometers. A lot of people, honestly, I know that as a bike tour guide, a lot of people are very tired after 12 kilometers of cycling at 12 kilometers an hour. That happens. So you have to kind of sense a little bit where those people's demands are, and then I guess adjust to it. And like Jamie said, organize a bike tour. Doesn't have to be from Toronto to Kingston and back in one day, but it's like in the neighborhood, and maybe you can stop halfway for an ice cream somewhere. So I've been pushing that I'm also the president of the community association here. And for the fun of it, I put 2 8-kilometer bike rides out. And what do you know? It's like the best visited page. And I'm thinking, can you not come up with that yourself? But no, people can't. You have to kind of give this 8-kilometer route with an ice cream shop halfway. So that was a long answer, sorry. I see some other. Yeah.
Fareed, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I feel that a common theme that we've been seeing is that recreation, leisure, especially either during this pandemic or for different reasons, somehow leads to bicycling becoming a large part of your transportation in general. So how can you blur that line? I don't know who this question is destined to, maybe Hans or Christopher, but how get that line from bicycling for fun, maybe a few times a year, to wanting to see more bicycling as part of your daily lifestyle, maybe as a mode of transportation?
I think it's a good one for Christopher.
Oh, you're gonna call me out, brother? Okay. So, living through experience. When I got my bike last year, I remember that initial ride I went 2 hours out of town, by the way, to Perry Sound to get my bicycle last year. That's how difficult it was to track something down. And I rode my bicycle around that store, like the back streets in Perry Sound, and I felt that wind in my face, and I was just like, yeah, this is gonna be fun. However, my butt hurt. So by the time I brought the bike home, and I took a ride, maybe 5 kilometers or so, because I was, like Hans mentioned, the waterfront is the popular destination. I tried to ride down to the active TO that we had here in Toronto, where Lakeshore West was shut down, and 5 kilometers in, all my water was done. I took like a 45-minute break. I contemplated calling an Uber. It was bad. It was really bad. But I just kept on riding. And then over time, your body just adjusts. And when it comes to what you're talking about from like a sports standpoint, leisure, or commuting, if you ride, and anybody here can attest to this, the more you ride and the more kilometers your body is able to put on, things like commuting to work that might have seemed like such a crazy idea become like a 1 hour bike ride. So case in point, like I live about a 20-minute drive from work on the 401 with my car. But if I ride to work, I can get to work in an hour, 55 minutes, depending on my pace. And just that idea was totally like, it wasn't even on the table until I built up my abilities where 15 or 20 kilometer trips didn't seem like such a daunting task. It seemed like, oh, that's light work for me. It's not a big deal. And then it becomes realistic to you. But also what I'll say is from like a sports standpoint, I don't know much about cycling from a sport. Like when the Olympics come on, like during the velodrome, I'll watch that. I'm not in tune with like the crit stuff and the racing. And I don't know anything about it as a sport. I just know it as I put air in my tires, I have my helmet, put my shades on, and I'm going outside. And I think when people put that limit on themselves, they look at cycling at that pro level and they see groups and they see kits and they see all that stuff. You immediately forget that when you were a kid, you did the exact same thing, just without the Lycra. You did the exact same thing. You rode your bike with your friends. And that's something that I've been feeding to people like this whole time. Because that's exactly what my friends and I do. We just ride, So we don't look at it as a sport. We don't look at it as compete. If anything, you're competing with yourself and your own speeds and your own limits and your own, daily highs or weekend highs, and just enjoying it. And once it's fun, like anything's achievable. And I'm just living through experience on that one. So I hope that answers your question, Fareed. But that's pretty much exactly what happened to me, to be honest with you.
Thanks.
All right, who else has a burning question? LANRICK, I've got one for you. I'm sure Hans's story of the Laurier bike lanes must have got you thinking about the Danforth bike lanes, which are locally significant for you. How did it feel for you seeing that project come to life as someone who now works for 880 Cities, who is a big part of initiating that, and now I think is permanent, or at least a long-term pilot in Toronto terms?
So yeah, so you know what, it is amazingly exciting to see infrastructure like that has been advocated for, begged for many years before I'd even moved out to the East End. But it's a bit bittersweet because, I mean, the fact that literally COVID had to happen. And it was great that 880 Cities, before I was even there, had done that pop-up. But let's be honest, the politicians that are here in Toronto Danforth were kind of mum when it came to Destination Danforth. A lot of cheering in Beaches East York, a lot of cheering in Kristen Warren-Tam's ward, but here in this ward through Greektown, it was very sublime. And we needed COVID to kind of, hit us over the head as a impetus to make this happen. I am hoping that the success of Destination Danforth allows for us to not look at Build Back Better as just a hashtag, but it needs to be it needs to be a thing that we look at creating cycling infrastructure that is not just painted lines, but that is used to be able to commute to work and to go to the beach and have fun and to meet with your friends and to do all the things that you would do in a car, but to be able to do them on your bike and do them safely and do it so that it's not just you as an individual, but it is groups of people, any person, regardless of their age, regardless of their skill level, that they can get from A to B as safely as possible. So great that it's here. I want to make sure that we're not waiting for the next pandemic to see another piece of infrastructure being put forth.
Well said. Got a hand up from Neil again. We'll go over to you, Neil, and maybe someone wants to, after that, propose a question to Jamie, who we heard from first tonight.
So thanks, Matt. And I don't want to monopolize the discussion here, but I do have a question for Jamie, actually. And it's, Jamie, you've obviously been involved in advocacy around Ontario for bikes, just over some years. Just curious to see what, how you've seen the evolution and where you think we are right now. I mean, it seems that we're building a lot of momentum, and that there's some big changes that are possible in the years to come. Just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on where we're at in the grand scheme of things.
Thanks, Neil. That's a big but interesting question. And yeah, I agree with you that I feel like, thinking broadly about Ontario, we're at a stage where we've got some momentum, but sometimes after that momentum, I feel like we've almost hit that little dip right after, where, a couple of years ago, a lot of communities got the first provincial investment to build bike infrastructure in their community. And that meant that a lot of municipalities got, their first protected bike lane or their first bike box or a really meaningful piece of infrastructure. And we haven't necessarily built on that enough to actually create like networks where people can get to school or to the grocery store or to their friend's house. I think many of us on the call have probably had the experience of, walking your bike to the bike lane or trying to find that residential street so you can get to that really great bike lane. So I think, and Hans's story about Laurier, that was Ontario's first ever separated downtown bike lane. And it was so great that Ottawa was able to, put that through and demonstrate that. And we've seen more and more cities do that. And I think it's clear that in many ways the demand is there. And what I found really interesting being involved in some of the advocacy around the funding, the province at one point invested $100 million in building bike infrastructure in municipalities. And what that revealed was we'd been talking about the funding for so long, like we don't have enough money, we don't have enough money. All of a sudden the province came to the table with money, and municipalities didn't have the capacity or the design or the staff to do it. And we realized that it wasn't just the money. We were actually lacking the entire ecosystem to build bicycle-friendly communities, in my opinion. And so I think that's kind of where we're at. We've seen some initial investments, we've seen some great momentum, but we need to kind of, get into a space where we're thinking of building networks for everyone and not just our first or second bike lane.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's what Jamie says. That's the same thing I've been noticing, and obviously I'm kind of focusing on Ottawa, but I noticed a lot of the small towns, they just don't have the capacity. Whereas in Ottawa, they know that eventually there might be some money coming through some side door or some announcement. So what Ottawa does is basically there's a whole bunch of projects shovel ready sitting on the shelf. And the moment that Catherine McKenna says, we're going to or we have $10 million, one of the guys or Suzanne Rowe, she just takes that binder off the shelf and here's the plan, roughly speaking. So a place like Ottawa is very prepared. And luckily, even though we've seen a little bit of a dip in Ottawa as well, I think, but there's still a lot of stuff going. And one of the things really important, for example, in terms of policy is that basically that if a road is being dug up for a sewer of a water main, the road, if possible, is rebuilt with infrastructure for cycling as well. Sometimes it's just a bike lane and the lanes are becoming a little narrower, the driver's lanes. And sometimes it's a raised bike lane. Sometimes, if you're lucky, there's space for a multi-use pathway. But in Ottawa, the money is there and the plans are already there to kind of move forward. That's why you see, for example, in Ottawa, all the Dutch-style intersections popping up now. I think one of the planners told me we have 16 now, and there's a few dozen coming in the next few years. There's a bunch of bridges being built, big ones over the highway, which came partly from LRT money. So they're folding it in there as well to get access to the train station. So it's having it on the shelf. It's partly being very creative with other projects and kind of moving that bicycle infrastructure in there as well. So there's different ways to actually work on that. But again, City Council has to approve that, of course. And if they're adamantly against everything, you don't get anywhere. But to give you an idea, Ottawa has been developing quite well over the last 10 years, I think. And I'm not sure if everybody saw the city rankings from the People for Bikes. If you would take Ottawa Gatineau as a region, because Gatineau has done its own share, if you take it as a region, we are now basically at the same level as Portland, Oregon, which has always been the big example for us, like, oh, if we also only get there. And now we are actually, in terms of points, if you look to the city rankings, as a region, we are at the same level, actually a little bit higher than Portland. So you don't have to go to the States anymore, just come to Ottawa and check it out.
You sound like a bicycle tour guide, Hans.
Yes, I am.
I'm going to give the final question for the evening to Army, and then we'll just wrap things up really quickly. Over to you, Army.
Thanks. So my question's not too long. My question's for Christopher. But first, I want to mention that I envy your ability to inspire people to get into biking. You got some of my high school friends into biking.
Yeah, for real?
Yes. I see them liking your photos and start posting pictures of them biking after. But anyway, so it's interesting because Scarborough is and Toronto suburbs in general, they're seen as so anti-bike. And I've been trying to prove that misconception wrong. And I thank you for helping to prove that it's wrong. But then there's a lot of people biking in Scarborough who are not aware that there is all this opposition against like the Brimley bike lanes and stuff like that. So I'm curious to know if what your experience with Scarborough residents has been like, and in terms of like have they been more interested in keeping bike infrastructure, and is there a way that we could amplify the voice of Scarborough?
Oh man, that's super deep. To be very honest with you, from an advocacy standpoint, I'm very new to it. You know, like I met some very cool people last year who are heavily involved in advocacy, and they tell me, you know, some of the dirt work that they do, like 10 toes deep, like really trying to make change happen. And I'm very new to that. The only way that I feel I can advocate for cycling is to ride and to get other people to ride and then show up at places where you typically don't expect to see cyclists. So case in point, last year at the club, we had active TO in Toronto. They shut down Lakeshore West, Lakeshore East, and Bayview. So myself as a new cyclist, as well as a lot of the people that ride with us, we spent 90% of our time, you know, on the Martin Goodman Trail, connecting to Lakeshore West or connecting to Lakeshore East, Bayview, and so on and so forth. But I'm a Scarborough guy. And I can say, aside from the very first ride that we did at Morningside Park, I only had one other ride in Scarborough where we met up in Gilwood Village, because that's where I'm from. So those who know Scarborough, Gilwood Village is a very quaint, quiet part of Scarborough. We have one traffic light, one high school, one public school, and a handful of plazas. But the streets are so quiet. There's so many side streets, there's so many little nooks and cul-de-sacs and such that you can ride through. And when I hosted a ride from Scarborough last year, I had 100 people come outside. And to be honest with you, a lot of those people are people that I've known from school or from playing sports, but they never came downtown. So when you think of all the times that I hosted rides in the city, there's only a handful of those people that I knew from Scarborough that were coming to the city to ride with me. But the minute I showed up in Scarborough, they were all there. So I don't know if it's because of the lack of infrastructure or the lack of connection to like the waterfront trail, or that they just don't know that it exists. You don't really see as many cyclists in Scarborough that you would see if you were to go downtown and sit at Harborfront on Queens Quay for half an hour, where there's so much traffic, but they are there. So the only thing I can do is to keep giving them an opportunity to ride, especially in numbers, and to show the community that, you know, there are people out here that do ride their bikes and that would find value in investing in the infrastructure to make it safer and a bit more positive for everybody. Because that is one of the main barriers, is the infrastructure. There's not a lot of people that are confident riding on the street, myself included. I just became confident maybe in the winter, where there wasn't that many cars and I was really taking advantage of my lane positioning and learning and stuff like that. So just getting outside, that's probably the one thing I can say, Army. And the more people that show up, the better, hopefully, and hopefully it gets eyes on the possibilities of what it could look like if there was a bit more infrastructure in Scarborough. Like, they are trying. I've seen some improvements, but there's a lot of room to go.
Thanks, Chris. I think if there's one key takeaway from tonight, it's that there's no lack of interest in cycling. It may be a lack of infrastructure, but there is so much interest and so much leadership. And I hope everyone leaves tonight feeling a little bit more inspired about where we're headed in cycling in Ontario and elsewhere in the world. And I hope maybe you gleaned a couple lessons from the stories to take away for your daily life. We're going to end the event here. And I have one final ask for anyone who has energy left. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for a feedback survey. We would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on Bike Minds events. Spend 5 minutes doing it after we end, if you have the energy left. And otherwise, stay tuned for our next event. We'll probably be taking a summer break, and we'll see you back in the fall. So thanks everyone for joining. Have a great night. Thanks to our storytellers. Take care, everyone.